A shattered vase tells a cleaner story than any witness. Welcome to Clue Lore. I am your host, Vale. Comment where you're tuning in from. I appreciate you. Let's begin. If you've never seen a man treat a front stoop like a battlefield, you haven't watched Fritz Brenner answer our bell at 11:40 on a wet Tuesday with Nero Wolfe at table and the roast exactly where it belonged, inside the schedule. It started, as it usually does, with Wolfe's stomach and somebody else's bad manners. Wolfe was in the dining room, enormous and contented, wearing that look he got when Fritz had done something right and the universe had temporarily agreed not to interfere. Fritz had done something right. The smell alone had me ready to forgive taxes. I was in my chair with a napkin in my lap and a fork in my hand. You trying to decide whether to open with the potatoes or do the civilized thing and pretend I had principles. Then the bell sounded. Not a polite little ping either. It was the kind of ring that said the person on the other side had pressed the button with the flat of their thumb and meant to keep it there until the world acknowledged them. Wolfe's eyes didn't move. His face didn't change. The only sign that anything had happened was a slight tightening at one corner of his mouth. His version of a raised eyebrow. Fritz appeared in the doorway like an offended butler in an opera, which he wasn't because Fritz was a chef and only pretended to be a butler when civilization required it. "Excuse me," Fritz said, with the careful restraint of a man who had been forced to interrupt his own perfection. "There is a young woman. She is, how do you say, insistent." Wolfe's voice was calm enough to freeze whiskey. "We are at table. She says she will not go away." Fritz's blue eyes flicked, and I got the message. The lady wasn't merely persistent. She was a problem. "She says also." Fritz hesitated, and I loved him for it, because Fritz didn't hesitate unless something offended his sense of order. "She says she has brought something that belongs in this house." That finally did it. Wolfe's gaze shifted. Not to Fritz, but to me. It landed like a paperweight. "Archie," I set the fork down. "Sure. I'll tell her the sanctity of the brownstone is booked till 1. Wolfe's mouth tightened a hair. "You will see her. In the front room, and if she is ridiculous, you will be brief." "If she's ridiculous, I'll be lyrical." I stood up. "And if she's armed?" "She is a young woman," Wolfe said, as if that solved everything. It didn't, but it was the closest thing to permission I was going to get. I met her in the front room, which is our polite way of saying the room we use when we want somebody to feel they've entered a civilized place and not a trap. The curtains were half drawn against the wet day. The lamp on the side table made a soft pool of light on the rug. There was a smell of beeswax and old books, which in our line of work is as close to a comfort blanket as you get. She stood near the window, her back straight, her coat dark with rain, holding an object in both hands like it was either a baby or a bomb. It was a vase. Not a cheap, shiny department store thing either. This one had weight and age. White porcelain, with thin painted branches winding around it. Eye blossoms done in a red that looked like it had dried centuries ago. It was about 14 inches tall, and she held it with the careful tension you see in people carrying guilt. She wasn't pretty in the soft, helpless way that makes men do idiotic things. She was pretty in the sharp, competent way that makes men do idiotic things and then defend them in court. Maybe late 20s. Dark hair pinned up in a hurry. Gray eyes that didn't ask for mercy and didn't offer it. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. And if you've been in a room with enough clients, you can hear the question inside the statement. "Are you going to be what I need you to be, or am I wasting my time?" "That's me," I said. "You rang like you owned the button. That's a bold opener." "I apologize." She did not sound sorry. "But this can't wait." I nodded at the vase. "Is that the something that belongs in this house?" "Yes." I gave it a closer look without touching it. "It's a nice vase." "We have vases. They're mostly filled with orchids and Wolfe's opinions." Her grip tightened. This one was in your house. That's a strong claim. I put on my most accommodating face, which is what you'd call it if you didn't know me. When was it in my house? 4 days ago, she said. In Mr. Wolfe's office. Now that was better. If she had said the kitchen, I'd have thrown her out myself. Wolfe's office was sacred ground. The only things that moved in there did it with Wolfe's consent, and even then he watched them like a hawk watching a mouse that had read Nietzsche. You've been in Wolfe's office, I said. Yes. With a vase? Yes. On purpose? Her eyes narrowed. Is there another way to end up in someone's office with a vase? There's always another way, I said. It's a big city. She shifted the vase slightly, and for the first time I noticed her hands. There was a faint red line across one knuckle, as if she'd scraped it or burned it. Not fresh. A couple of days old. Listen, she said. My name is Llaya Rook. I came because Mr. Wolfe is the only man I know who can tell the truth without moving. That made me grin. That's a nice line. Did you practice it in the mirror? No. She stared at me like she was measuring how much contempt she could afford. I'm not here to flatter him. Good. He hates it. I nodded toward the chairs. Sit down. Or don't. Either way. So tell me why you're in my front room getting rain on my rug while Fritz's roast gets cold. Her mouth tightened at the mention of the rug, but she moved carefully and sat on the edge of a chair, keeping the vase upright in her lap as if it had a spine. This vase, she said, is evidence. Evidence of what? That someone lied inside your house. I blinked. That's broad. It's specific. She swallowed once, and it wasn't dramatic. It was controlled. That's how you could tell she was scared. 4 days ago, I met with Mr. Wolfe. I brought that vase because I didn't know how else to convince him I wasn't insane. I lifted my eyebrows. How'd that go? He refused to see me. She said it like she was reciting facts for a deposition. You saw me instead. I frowned. 4 days ago I was... Then it clicked. Wait, Saturday. Yes. Saturday. Wolfe had been in the plant rooms most of the morning, and I'd been in and out with the mail and the newspaper in my usual bad attitude. There had been a woman, yes. A woman who'd come with a tall box, who'd insisted it was fragile and important, and that she needed 5 minutes with Wolfe. I had told her Wolfe didn't do 5 minutes unless he got paid for them. I'd sent her away, or I thought I had. You're saying you got into Wolfe's office, I said slowly, with a vase on Saturday. I did, she said, after you told me to leave. I felt my neck get warm. There are a lot of things I can take with a smile. One of them is not somebody implying they slipped past me in my own house. How? I asked. I didn't slip past you, she said. There was a flash of anger now. You let me. That was cute. Lady, and I don't let anybody into Wolfe's office unless Wolfe says so, and Wolfe doesn't say so unless he's awake, and he's awake only when he wants to be. Her jaw set. Then someone used your name. That made the air in the room feel a degree colder. Walk me through it, I said. Slow. Exact. Pretend you're talking to a man who's paid to be suspicious. Her gaze flicked toward the hallway, like she could see the brownstone spine through the walls. I came with a vase in a box. I spoke to you in the entry. You told me Mr. Wolfe would not see me and that I should leave a letter if I wanted. Sounds like me, I admitted. I left. She paused. Then, less than 5 minutes later, you opened the door again and called to me from the stoop. You said... She hesitated. And that hesitation wasn't about memory. It was about meaning. You said, Mr. Wolfe had changed his mind, that he would see me. And you told me to hurry, because he doesn't like waiting. Now my neck was hot enough to fry Fritz's onions. I did not do that, I said. I know you didn't, she snapped. I realized it later. But at the time, your voice, your height, the doorway shadow. Somebody impersonated me. Yes. And you bought it. I was desperate, she said, and the words sounded like it had been scraped out of her throat. I sat on the arm of a chair across from her. Okay, so fake Archie invites you in. Then what? You led me to the office, she said. You walked behind me. You didn't speak much. You opened the office door. Mr. Wolfe was in his chair. Now that was impossible, because Wolfe on Saturday afternoon was either eating, reading, or being annoyed at the fact that other people exist. But he was not in his office receiving young women with porcelain. I'd have remembered. Describe him, I said. She looked at me like I was insulting her intelligence. Very large, very still in a suit. He didn't stand. At least they got that part right. I tried to keep it light, because the alternative was to start breaking furniture. What did he say? He said, You have brought the vase. I stared. That's specific. It was, she said. And he said, Place it on the desk. And I did. Then he asked me why I'd come. And why had you come? She looked down at the vase, at the painted branches wrapping around it like a secret. Because I wanted him to tell me if my father was going to destroy my life. That was the first personal thing she'd said, and it rang with the kind of trouble you can smell. Your father, I repeated. Yes, Harold Rook. The name didn't hit me like a punch, but it did tap the bell in my memory. Rook. Money. Something to do with art, or auctions, or foundations. One of those men who can buy a painting and also buy silence. All right, I said. So you talk to a man you believe is Wolfe in Wolfe's office, with your vase on Wolfe's desk. What does this have to do with a lie? She lifted her eyes. Because he told me something. Something only Mr. Wolfe could have known if he had met my father. He said my father had been in that room the day before. That's Thursday, I said. Yes. He said my father had asked him to take a certain action. What action? Her fingers pressed into the porcelain, white on white. To keep me from speaking. To whom? She swallowed again. To the board of the Rook Cultural Trust. Ah, trusts. Boards. Some the kind of polite cannibalism rich families do with paperwork. So he tells you your father came here and hired Wolfe to shut you up? Yes. And you believed him? Yes. Then what happened? She drew in a breath. Then he asked me where I had been on Wednesday night. I frowned. Wednesday night? What happened Wednesday night? A meeting, she said quietly. A private meeting with someone from the trust, someone who had promised to help me. And at that moment, she said, I realized he was watching me too closely, not like a man listening, like a man fishing. I leaned forward. What did you do? I lied, she said. Now we were getting somewhere. I told him I'd been home, she said, alone. And he smiled. Not with his mouth, just in his eyes. And he said, the vase will know if you lie again. I stared at her. The vase? She nodded once. He said it was a thing from my family's collection, that it had been altered, that it could prove whether someone spoke truth in its presence. I couldn't help it. A laugh escaped me. That's the craziest. It is, she cut in. And that's why I came to Mr. Wolfe in the first place. Because my father believes in symbols and performances. He uses them to frighten people. He calls it tradition. I call it cruelty. I held up a hand. Okay. Fine. Your father is a rich man with hobbies. But how does any of this land on my rug today with you clutching a porcelain mood ring? Because, she said, and now her voice tightened. When I left that office, I realized you were standing in the hall. My stomach dropped an inch. You were carrying mail, she said. You asked me if I had left the letter, as you looked at the box and said, "What's that?" like you'd never seen it. She let that sit for a second, like a poker player laying down a card and waiting for the other guy to blink. "So," I said slowly, "you think somebody posed as me, and somebody posed as Wolfe?" "Yes. And you're here because you want the real Wolfe to know his house was used as a stage?" "Yes. And you brought the vase because it left your house," she said, "in someone else's hands." Now that was the kind of sentence that makes a brownstone feel less like a home and more like a crime scene. "I didn't take it," I said. "I know," she said, and for the first time her eyes softened a fraction. I watched. The man who led me to the office carried the vase out afterward in the box. He said Mr. Wolfe didn't want it left there. "Did you see his face?" "No. He kept behind me." Her jaw clenched. "But I saw his hands when he took the box. He had a cut across the knuckle." She glanced at her own hand, the faint red line. "He brushed me," she said. "That's how I got it." The room was quiet except for the soft hiss of rain against the window. The brown stone, which normally felt like a fortress, suddenly felt like it had been entered by a ghost with a key. I stood up. "All right, Ms. Rourke, I'm going to do something Wolfe hates." "What?" "I'm going to disturb him during lunch." Her lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile. "Tell him," she said. "Tell him someone used his chair like a prop." I turned toward the hall, then stopped and looked back at the vase. "One more thing," I said. "Does the vase really know if someone lies?" She stared at me, serious as a judge. "No." I blinked. "My father likes myths," she said. "But the vase knows something else." "What's that?" "It knows," she said, "who touched it when it was taken from your office." That was when I stopped thinking about Fritz's roast and started thinking about locks. I went down the hall to the dining room and said, "Wolfe, we've got company, and it's not ridiculous." He didn't move. He didn't ask how I could know. But his eyes lifted, slow and heavy, and the corner of his mouth tightened again. "Archie," he said, "if you have allowed strangers to perform theater in my office, you will not like my opinion of you." "I already don't," I said, "but you're going to like this less." And then I told him about a vase that had rung our doorbell. Wolfe listened without interrupting, which in his case was not a courtesy but a tactic. He ate while I talked, carving the roast with surgical dignity, chewing slowly, letting facts stack up in his head like ledgers. Fritz hovered, offended by the intrusion but professional enough to keep the plates moving. Miss Rourke waited in the front room with the vase, probably wondering if she'd just dropped her problem into the lap of a man who would crush it flat and send it back postage due. When I finished, Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin and regarded me over folded hands. "So," he said, "my house has been used as a masquerade, my person impersonated, my office violated, and a porcelain object trafficked through my domain like a theatrical prop." "That's the short version," I said. "The long version has a rich father, a scared daughter, and somebody with a knuckle scar who knows our floor plan." Wolfe snorted softly. There are few things I dislike more than theatrics. One of them is incompetence in theatrics." He turned his head slightly. "Fritz." "Yes, Herr Wolfe?" "Clear the table. Coffee. Then bring the young woman here, with the vase." Fritz hesitated, then nodded. I could almost hear the clatter in his mind as he adjusted the evening's order of importance. Dinner could wait. The brownstone could not. A minute later, Miss Rourke stood in the doorway of Wolfe's office, holding the vase like it had gained weight. Wolfe did not invite her to sit. He did not rise. He merely studied her, eyes steady, expression unreadable. "Miss Rourke," he said at last, "I am told you have been deceived in my name." "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady, but her shoulders were tight. "And you believe," Wolfe went on, "that this deception involved my physical presence?" "I do," she said, "or a very good imitation." Wolfe's lips twitched, which for him was the equivalent of a laugh. There is no good imitation. He gestured with 2 fingers. The vase. She stepped forward and placed it carefully on the corner of his desk. The porcelain looked out of place among the papers, the pen holder, the familiar clutter that had never once been rearranged without Wolfe noticing. He did not touch it. "Tell me," Wolfe said, "exactly where it stood." She pointed. "There, beside the blotter. He made a point of not letting it be too close to the edge." Interesting. That was Wolfe's habit. He hated precariousness. "And when it was removed?" Wolfe asked. "The man who brought me here took it after I left the office. And he said you didn't want it kept." Wolfe closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, something had settled behind them, heavy and deliberate. "Archie," he said, "you will telephone Saul Panzer." "Already?" I said. "We're barely past coffee." "This is not a matter for delay," Wolfe said. "Someone has studied my routines, mimicked my voice, and walked unchallenged through my house. That indicates either audacity or familiarity. I wish to know which." I went to the phone in the corner and dialed Saul's number. While it rang, Wolfe addressed Miss Rook again. "Your father," he said. "Harold Rook. You believe him capable of staging such a deception?" She hesitated. "Capable, yes. Likely, no. He prefers direct control." "Money," Wolfe supplied. "And pressure," she agreed. Not tricks." "Then why involve my house?" Wolfe asked. "Because," she said quietly, "your name carries weight. If you told me my father was acting against me, I would believe it. And if others believed I'd come to you, they would draw conclusions." Wolfe finished. "Yes." Saul picked up, and I filled him in fast, keeping it lean. He asked 2 questions, both sharp, then said he'd be there in 20 minutes. Wolfe turned back to the vase. "You claim it knows who touched it." Miss Rook nodded. "Not mystically, practically. My grandfather had it modified years ago. The glaze was mixed with a compound that reacts to skin oils. Under certain light, fingerprints appear clearly, and they last." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted a millimeter. "Ingenious and barbaric." "My family specializes in both," she said. "Where is it normally kept?" Wolfe asked. "In my father's study. Locked." "And yet you brought it to me." "Yes." "And someone removed it." "Yes." Wolfe's gaze flicked to me. "Archie, who was in this house on Saturday?" I didn't need to think long. "You, me, Fritz. Theodore was out. No regular visitors, no clients admitted. One woman, Miss Rook, who I turned away." "And deliveries?" "Groceries in the morning, newspaper, mail." Wolfe nodded. "Someone knew my office would be empty. Someone knew my voice well enough to approximate it. Someone knew your mannerisms sufficiently to deceive this woman." "That narrows it down to," I said. "Someone who has been here before," Wolfe said calmly. "Not often. Often enough." Miss Rourke shifted. "There was something else." "Yes," Wolfe said. "The man pretending to be you, he asked about Wednesday night, about a meeting I had. That information wasn't public." "Who knew of it?" Wolfe asked. "My father, 2 members of the trust board, and the man I met." Wolfe leaned back slightly. "Then our masquerader is not merely an actor, he is informed." Saul arrived shortly after, quiet as a shadow, eyes already working the room. Wolfe brought him up to speed with ruthless efficiency. Saul asked to see the vase. "Not yet," Wolfe said. "First, I wish to understand the scope of the violation." He looked at me. "Archie, you will retrace Saturday, minute by minute. Where were you when Miss Rourke was allegedly readmitted?" I frowned. I went upstairs to get the ledgers from the 3rd shelf in the hall cabinet. "Alone?" "Yes." "For how long?" 5 minutes, maybe 6. Wolfe closed his eyes again, just briefly. "Sufficient." Miss Rourke inhaled sharply. Oh, so someone was already inside. Possibly, Wolfe said. Or someone entered when you exited. Saul spoke for the first time. Either way, they knew the house. Yes, Wolfe agreed, and they knew my habits well enough to exploit them. He opened his eyes and looked at Miss Rourke. Did the man who impersonated me offer advice, or merely information? He offered caution, she said. He said I should reconsider my intentions, for my own good. Did he threaten you? No, he didn't need to. Wolfe nodded. Subtlety masquerading as concern, a common vice among the powerful. He finally reached out and touched the vase, just once with 2 fingers, then withdrew his hand and wiped his fingertips with a handkerchief. Saul, he said, you will have this examined. Carefully, and I wish to know every mark upon it that does not belong to Miss Rourke. Saul took it with care. I'll see to it. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will visit the Rourke Cultural Trust tomorrow, casually. You will observe. You will listen. You will learn who benefits from Miss Rourke's silence. I grinned. Field trip? I'll wear a tie. Do, Wolfe said. Appear harmless. Miss Rourke looked from one of us to the other, and me. You, Wolfe said, will remain available. You will not confront your father. You will not speak to the board. You will do nothing that could be construed as initiative. Her jaw tightened. I don't like being managed. Then you should not have come here, Wolfe said evenly. My house has been disturbed. That demands redress. Silence settled over the office, thick and controlled. Outside, the rain had eased, so leaving the city washed and watchful. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and regarded the space where the vase had been. Someone believed, he said softly, that they could borrow my authority without consequence. His eyes lifted to me. That, he said, is a miscalculation. Saul left with the vase tucked under his arm like a priceless football, and Miss Rourke left shortly after, with instructions that boiled down to stay visible, say nothing, and answer your phone. Fritz reclaimed the kitchen with wounded dignity. The brownstone settled, but it didn't relax. Houses like ours remember insults. Wolfe sat in silence for a full minute after the front door closed, eyes half-lidded, fingers steepled. I waited. Interrupting Wolfe when he's arranging facts is like stepping into traffic to ask directions. Archie, he said finally. Describe again the man's voice as Miss Rourke reported it. She said it sounded like yours, I said. Measured, flat, slightly impatient, but I shrugged. Anybody with a decent ear and bad intentions could manage that. No, Wolfe said. Not anybody. Few men possess the arrogance to attempt it. That's a short list, I said. And I don't like any of them. Nor should you, Wolfe said. You will visit the trust in the morning. Before that, I wish a list of its board members, staff, and recent petitioners. I'll get it tonight. You will also compile, Wolfe continued, and a list of individuals who have been inside this house in the past 6 months. That's longer. Then begin. I went upstairs to my room and worked until the city outside quieted into that late-night hum where taxis whisper and secrets feel more comfortable. The trust's board was a predictable lineup. Harold Rourke at the center, 2 financiers, a lawyer, a curator, and, this caught my eye, a consultant named Miles Vane, former acquisitions specialist. Former, because he'd been dismissed quietly 3 months ago after a disagreement over provenance. I whistled softly. Provenance disputes make people imaginative. Downstairs, Wolfe was still awake when I brought him the list. He read it once, then again, slower. Miles Vane, he said. I recall the name. You would, I said. No, he tried to sell you a bronze that might have been Greek if you squinted and prayed. Wolfe snorted. Yes, a man offended by accuracy. He's been in the house, I added. Twice, once for that bronze, once with Rourke himself about a year ago. Wolfe's eyes lifted. Then he knows the layout. He has heard my voice. He has motive. And probably a knuckle scar if he's been moving boxes, I said. Possibly, Wolfe said, but not conclusively. Morning came grey and damp, which felt appropriate. I put on the harmless tie and headed to the Trust's offices, a glass and limestone affair that smelled like money and disinfectant. The receptionist smiled like it was part of her job description. "I'm looking for Mr. Vane," I said casually. She blinked. "Mr. Vane no longer works here." "Shame," I said. "I hear he's unforgettable." She didn't smile at that. She pointed me toward the curator instead, a woman named Elise Marrow, who wore authority like a tailored jacket. She talked freely about upcoming exhibits, donations, the importance of discretion. When I asked about Miss Rourke, her mouth tightened. "Family matters," she said. "We prefer not to air them." "Of course," I said. "But someone aired Wolfe's office instead." Her eyes flicked up, sharp. "I beg your pardon?" "Just admiring the architecture," I said, and retreated before I pushed my luck. Outside, I took a slow walk around the block. A man stood across the street pretending to check his phone while watching the building's reflection in the glass. Mid-30s. Trim. Gloves, despite the mild weather. I circled once. He didn't move. I circled again, wider. He stepped off the curb and followed at a distance that said, "Professional." That made me smile. Nothing like being tailed to brighten your day. I ducked into a cafe, waited, then slipped out the back. When I came around the corner, he was there, adjusting his glove. The cut on his knuckle was thin and pale. "Morning," I said. He startled, just a fraction too late. "Do I know you?" "Not well enough," I said. "But you've been watching the Trust like it owes you money." His jaw tightened. "You should mind your business." "I do," I said. "It's people's business." He turned to leave. I didn't stop him. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough. Back at the brownstone, Saul was waiting, face grave. "The vase talks," he said. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "Explain." "3 distinct sets of prints," Saul said. "Miss Rourke's. Yours, Archie. From when you helped her steady it at the door." "I didn't." "You did," Saul said. "Briefly. And one more. Male. Right hand dominant. Scarred knuckle." Wolfe closed his eyes in satisfaction. "And I ran it," Saul said. "Old file. Miles Vane." I let out a low breath. "That was fast." Saul shrugged. "He's been sloppy lately." Wolfe leaned back. "So, Mr. Vane, dismissed, resentful, knowledgeable, and ambitious, uses my house to intimidate Miss Rourke on behalf of her father," I said. "Or himself," Wolfe said. "Do not assume altruism." The phone rang. I answered. Miss Rourke's voice was tight. "He's here," she said. "My father. He wants to talk." "Don't," I said. "I told him I wouldn't," she said. "Now he's angry." "Good," Wolfe said, having listened in. "Anger precipitates error." "Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Let's invite him here. This afternoon." There was a pause. "He won't come." "He will," Wolfe said calmly. "Tell him I have proof his consultant abused my name and that I intend to involve the police unless he explains why." Another pause. Then, softly, "All right." Wolfe hung up. "Archie," he said, "this afternoon we will host a gathering." I grinned. "Office chairs all around?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "I will remain seated." Outside, the brownstone stood quiet, dignified, offended. And inside it, the trap was already set. By 3:00, the brownstone had that anticipatory stillness it gets when Wolfe plans to pull a string and see who jumps. Fritz had been instructed to serve coffee. Nothing more. No food to distract. no comforts to soften tempers. The chairs in Wolfe's office were arranged with deliberate symmetry, to each one an invitation and a warning. Wolfe sat in his own chair, immovable, hands resting on the arms like he was carved there. I hovered near my desk, notebook ready, eyes on the clock. Miss Rourke arrived first, alone, coat damp again, face set with the kind of resolve that comes from deciding not to flinch any more. She took the chair Wolfe indicated and folded her hands in her lap. "Thank you for coming promptly," Wolfe said. "I didn't want to be late," she replied. "For once." 10 minutes later, Harold Rourke arrived, filling the doorway with tailored confidence and a smile that had been practiced on donors and judges alike. He was a large man, not Wolfe large, but imposing in his own way. Silver hair, immaculate suit, eyes sharp and appraising. He glanced at his daughter, then at Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe," he said warmly, "say this is an unexpected pleasure." "Pleasure is not my concern," Wolfe replied. "Accuracy is." Rourke's smile thinned. "Always the purest." "Sit down," Wolfe said. Rourke did, though the chair protested slightly. He crossed one leg over the other and folded his hands, mirroring Wolfe's posture with a fraction too much effort. "You told my daughter," Wolfe began, "that you would not come." Rourke shrugged. "She underestimated my interest." "Or your anxiety," Wolfe said. Rourke's eyes flicked, just once. "I'm not anxious." "No," Wolfe agreed. "You're angry." Silence stretched. Miss Rourke stared at the carpet. "At some point," Rourke said lightly, "you will tell me why I'm here." "You are here," Wolfe said, "because my house was used to coerce your daughter." Rourke laughed, short and sharp. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Wolfe asked. "Then perhaps you can explain why your former consultant, Miles Vane, impersonated me in my office." Rourke's laughter died. "Miles Vane?" He shook his head. "I fired that man." "Yes," Wolfe said. "You deprived him of income, access, and relevance. A potent combination." Rourke leaned forward. "If Vane did something foolish, that's hardly my responsibility." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "It may be precisely that." The doorbell rang. I went to answer it and returned with Miles Vane, flanked by Saul Panzer. Vane's composure cracked the moment he saw Rourke. His eyes darted, calculating exits, consequences. The scar on his knuckle was unmistakable. "Mr. Vane," Wolfe said, "you are punctual. I appreciate that." Vane swallowed. "I didn't have much choice." "No," Wolfe agreed. "You did not." Wolfe gestured. "Sit." Vane obeyed stiffly, and Saul took up position near the door, silent and solid. Wolfe folded his hands. "Mr. Vane, you entered my house without permission, impersonated me and my assistant, and removed an object belonging to Miss Rourke. Do you deny this?" Vane opened his mouth, then closed it. His gaze flicked to Rourke. "I was protecting the trust." "That," Wolfe said, "is a lie." Vane flushed. "The trust was at risk. Miss Rourke was going to make accusations." "True accusations?" Wolfe asked. Vane hesitated. "Answer," Wolfe said. "Yes," Vane said finally, "but unnecessary ones." "Unnecessary to whom?" Wolfe asked. "To the donors," Vane said. "To the board. To Mr. Rourke." Wolfe nodded. "So you staged a performance. You used my authority to frighten Miss Rourke into silence." "It worked," Vane muttered. Miss Rourke's head snapped up. "For a day." Wolfe's eyes shifted to Rourke. "You knew." Rourke stiffened. "I suspected." "You suspected," Wolfe repeated, "that your consultant would impersonate me?" "I suspected he would. Handle it," Rourke said carefully. Wolfe's voice hardened. "You permitted an illegal act in my house." "I didn't authorize." "You benefited," Wolfe cut in. "That is sufficient." Rourke's face flushed. You're accusing me. I am stating a fact, Wolfe said. You allowed your desire for control to override propriety. Vane leaned forward desperately. Harold, tell him, be quiet, Rourke snapped. Wolfe watched them, serene. The vase, he said softly, revealed your touch, Mr. Vane. It also revealed something else. He nodded to Saul, who placed photographs on the desk. Fingerprint images, clear and damning. You see, Wolfe continued, you removed the vase after Miss Rourke departed. You did so to eliminate evidence, yet you failed to consider that evidence is persistent. Vane sagged. I didn't mean... Meaning is irrelevant, Wolfe said. Outcome is not. Rourke stood abruptly. This is extortion. No, Wolfe said. This is resolution. He leaned forward slightly, a rare movement, and fixed Rourke with a gaze that pinned him. You will instruct your board to accept your daughter's statement. You will sever all association with Mr. Vane, and you will issue a public acknowledgement of impropriety within the trust. Rourke laughed bitterly. And if I refuse? Wolfe's lips curved faintly. Then Mr. Vane will confess to impersonation, unlawful entry, and theft. He will also explain your role. The police will be involved. Donors will flee. But your legacy will be revised. Silence fell like a verdict. Rourke looked at his daughter. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his eyes. Miss Rourke met his gaze steadily. I won't be quiet anymore, she said. Rourke exhaled slowly. Very well. Wolfe leaned back. Excellent. Saul escorted Vane out, already murmuring about statements and lawyers. Rourke paused at the door. You didn't have to do this, he said to Wolfe. Yes, Wolfe said. I did. When they were gone, the office felt larger, emptier. Miss Rourke rose. Thank you, she said. Wolfe nodded once. Truth, when properly arranged, is efficient. After she left, Fritz appeared with coffee. Wolfe took a cup, inhaled, and closed his eyes. Archie, he said, people mistake symbols for power. Yeah, I said. Turns out power hates impersonation. Wolfe opened his eyes. And my chair, he said calmly, is not for borrowing. The house exhaled after they left, the way it always does when Wolfe finishes rearranging the moral furniture. Fritz moved quietly, setting the coffee just so, restoring the office to its preferred geometry. Wolfe sipped, eyes half closed, like a man who had eaten well without swallowing a bite. I leaned against my desk, notebook forgotten for once. You going to tell me, I said, when you figured out Rourke wasn't just an accessory? Wolfe opened one eye. I never believed him innocent. That's not what I asked. Wolfe sighed, indulgent. When a man allows another to act for him without explicit instruction, he retains plausible deniability. That is not morality, it is strategy. Mr. Rourke lives by strategy. And Vane? A man dismissed publicly, yet humiliated privately, Wolfe said. Such men seek to restore equilibrium by any means available. Impersonation appealed to him because it conferred instant authority. And you let him hang himself, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied, with porcelain. I smiled, but it didn't last. Something still nagged. Wolfe, I said, there's a loose end. He didn't ask which one. Proceed. Vane didn't just know the layout. He knew timing. He knew when I'd be upstairs, when you wouldn't be in the office. That's not just familiarity. That's observation. Wolfe considered that. You are correct. Meaning? Meaning, Wolfe said slowly, that this deception may not have been conceived solely by Mr. Vane. Right on cue, the phone rang. I picked it up. A calm, an official voice identified itself as Inspector Kramer. Yes, I said. He's here. I handed the phone to Wolfe. He listened, expression unchanged, then replaced the receiver. Mr. Vane, Wolfe said, has decided to be helpful. Of course he has, I said. He has confessed, Wolfe went on, to entering my house, impersonating me, and coercing Miss Rook. He has also named the individual who informed him of my Saturday routines. I straightened. Who? Wolfe looked at me. Theodore Horstman. I blinked. Theodore was Wolfe's plant assistant. Meticulous, punctual, devoted to orchids and silence. He had been with Wolfe for years. He was as much a fixture of the house as the chairs. That's not funny, I said. It is not intended to be, Wolfe replied. But Theodore is human, Wolfe said, and therefore fallible. The doorbell rang again, and softer this time, almost apologetic. Archie, Wolfe said, bring Mr. Horstman. I found Theodore standing stiffly in the entry, hat in hand, face pale. He followed me without a word, eyes fixed on the floor like it might swallow him. Wolfe regarded him with something approaching regret. Mr. Horstman, he said. How long? Theodore swallowed. 6 weeks. You informed Mr. Vane of my schedule, Wolfe said, of Mr. Goodwin's movements, of when my office would be unoccupied. Yes, Theodore said. I thought, he said he needed confirmation, Wolfe finished, that he wished to speak with Miss Rook privately, using my authority. Theodore nodded miserably. He said no one would be harmed. Wolfe's voice was calm, but it carried weight. You betrayed my house. Theodore flinched. I was paid. Money, Wolfe said, is a poor substitute for loyalty. I know, Theodore whispered. I watched him, trying to reconcile the man who watered orchids like children with the man who sold us out for an envelope. It didn't sit well. Inspector Kramer will arrive shortly, Wolfe said. You will remain. Theodore nodded. He did not look up. Kramer came, bluster and all, but Wolfe handled him with practiced ease. Facts laid out, confessions ready, no theatrics. Vane would be charged. Theodore would answer questions. Rourke's name would surface, but not loudly. That was Wolfe's compromise, justice without spectacle. By evening, the brownstone was quiet again. Too quiet. Theodore was gone. His room upstairs would stay empty. Fritz served dinner late, his movements subdued. Wolfe ate, but without his usual pleasure. I let him be. Afterward, he sat in his chair, eyes on the space where the vase had once stood. Wolfe, I said, you did the right thing. Yes, he said. That does not render it pleasant. Losing Theodore is regrettable, Wolfe said, but tolerable. I hesitated. You ever worry about the house? About it changing? Wolfe looked at me, really looked at me. The house, he said, endures because its principles endure. When they are violated, correction is necessary. Even when it hurts. Especially then, Wolfe said. He closed his eyes. Symbols, he added softly, are only dangerous when people forget what they represent. I thought of the vase, of fingerprints blooming under light, of lies told confidently and unmade quietly. Yeah, I said. Turns out the truth leaves marks. Wolfe opened his eyes. Indeed. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Coffee? Yes, Wolfe said. And tomorrow, orchids. The house settled into its familiar rhythm, scarred but intact, and I sat at my desk, pen moving, thinking about how a vase that knew no lies had reminded us all that even the most controlled worlds can be disturbed, briefly, by human folly. But only briefly. Morning came back the way it always does on West 35th, without apology. The brownstone woke in layers, pipes ticking, Fritz moving like a rumour, Wolfe's alarm chiming with the authority of a small European monarchy. If yesterday had been a disturbance, today was restitution. I was at my desk with coffee when Wolfe emerged from the elevator, already in full command of himself. The night had not softened him, it had clarified him. He paused, surveyed the office, and gave a fractional nod, as if confirming that the furniture, at least, he had learned its lesson. "Archie," he said, "has Inspector Kramer concluded his enthusiasm?" "He left satisfied," I said, which is his version of a standing ovation. Wolfe grunted. "And Mr. Horstman?" "Released pending further inquiry." He packed quietly. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. It wasn't grief exactly. It was the acknowledgement of cost. "Very well," he said. "Proceed with the day." The day, as it turned out, had one more visitor. Miss Rook arrived just before noon. She looked different, lighter, straighter, like someone who had put down a burden and was still surprised her hands were free. She carried no vase this time. "My father issued the statement this morning," she said after Wolfe invited her to sit. "The board accepted my testimony. Mr. Vane's name has been removed." "Appropriate," Wolfe said. She hesitated. "I wanted to thank you." "Properly." Wolfe inclined his head. "Gratitude is unnecessary. The correction of error is sufficient reward." She smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It is," Wolfe said, "once one has the facts." She stood to leave, then paused. "The vase," she said. "I've decided to donate it." Wolfe's eyebrows rose. "To a museum?" "No," she said. "To a storage facility. Some objects do their work and should then be allowed to rest." Wolfe considered that, then nodded. "A sensible conclusion." After she left, Fritz appeared with lunch, the smell of it restoring the world to its proper axis. Wolfe ate with renewed appetite, which told me more than any speech could have. When he finished, he leaned back, napkin folded precisely. "Archie," he said, "summarize." I blinked. "You want the highlights?" "The essence." "All right," I said. Vane wanted back in the game. Rourke wanted control. Horstman wanted money. They all wanted to borrow your authority because it saves effort. "Yes," Wolfe said. And it didn't work," I said. "Because authority borrowed leaves fingerprints." Wolfe's lips curved, just barely. "Acceptable." I hesitated, then asked the thing that had been needling me since dawn. "Wolfe, if the vase hadn't existed, would you still have solved it?" "Certainly," he said. "How?" "People who lie," Wolfe said calmly, "are compelled to maintain consistency. People who tell the truth are not. Mr. Vane was consistent to the point of rigidity. Mr. Rourke was consistent to the point of evasion. Mr. Horstman was consistent to the point of fear. The Vase merely hastened their capitulation." I grinned. Good to know we're not dependent on enchanted porcelain." Wolfe snorted. "I tolerate orchids. I do not tolerate superstition." The afternoon passed quietly. No bells rang, no chairs were borrowed. The brownstone resumed its role as a place where things are known and therefore controlled. As evening settled, Wolfe sat in his chair, book open, eyes moving slowly across the page. I watched him for a minute, then said, "You know, most men would have pressed charges harder. Made an example." "Yes," Wolfe said without looking up. "Most men are interested in noise." "And you?" "I'm interested in order." I nodded. "You ever worry that letting Rourke off light sends the wrong message?" Wolfe turned a page. "On the contrary, he has learned that influence does not confer immunity. Oh, that lesson will endure longer than any indictment." "Optimistic?" I said. "Practical," Wolfe corrected. Dinner was served on time. Fritz had recovered his good humor, which meant the world was healing. Wolfe ate well, I ate better. Afterward, Wolfe returned to his chair, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. "Archie," he said, "what did you learn?" "That I should never leave the floor unattended," I said promptly. "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Anything else?" I thought about Miss Rourke, about Theodore, about Vane's desperation and Rourke's polished fury. That people will believe almost anything if it's delivered from a big enough chair. Wolfe's eyes met mine. And that the truth doesn't need a performance, I said. It just needs time and a place to sit. Wolfe closed his eyes, satisfied. An acceptable aphorism. The brownstone grew quiet again, the good quiet, the kind that means things are where they belong. Outside, the city went on, lying, hurrying, borrowing authority it hadn't earned. Inside, Nero Wolfe remained seated, unborrowed and unmoved. As for me, I sharpened my pencil and thought about how a vase that knew no lies had done its job by proving something simpler. Lies always leave a trace, and sooner or later they ring the doorbell.